my name is Shamima. As I already said, I'm president and CEO of IBS Consulting. I am a student, but for the past For the past like 3 years, so 2.5, almost 3 years, I've also been an entrepreneur. I started IBS Consulting during the pandemic in 2020. That's when I kind of had like, okay, all my friends are doing something. What do I want to do? And then the idea came to me to go into like academic mentorship. So I started out as a mentor within my university. I would basically coach students to improve their grades. And then from there, the vision got bigger. And then I realized there was more I want to do actually to help, especially people back home. And then that's when I started IBS. And then I've helped countless Ghanaian students since then. Some of my clients have gone into MIT, Yale, Columbia, GW, and for me, it's very inspiring when I'm able to act as the conduit to get people into places like that. Because a lot of the time when you're growing up in Ghana, sometimes you share a vision with someone and then they strike you down, or you say you want to get here and they say, well, like no Ghanaian has done that before, or something of that nature. Like I have had my fair share of comments like that. And still, no matter what I hear, I'm like, okay, but if no Ghanaian has done it before, I want to be the first Ghanaian who does it. I've realized that that's a good mindset to be in. So like Margaret said, I interned with Deloitte last year because I won the Deloitte Black Scholarship. I've worked at a number of Magic Circle law firms. And so I've kind of built experiences in entrepreneurship, legal as well, and then now in consulting. My favorite food is fufu. And if anyone is on my social media, that's like something they know. It's not like a secret. I'm very passionate about fufu as well, just like I am about education. So yeah, thank you for waking up. I know it's a Saturday afternoon and making the time to hear me speak. So I'm not going to waste any more time. And apologies if anyone walks into my room while I'm talking. It might be my brother. Okay. So today I mainly wanted to talk to you about academics. As a student, what are some things you can do to kind of help you improve your grades while you are going to school? So I started my university journey in 2019, and my program is 4 years. So I'm essentially in my final semester doing criminal justice. So I'm doing an honors program, very, very competitive. But for over 3 years, I've maintained my spot as being 0.5%. I am a part of 0.5% of my program. I've been on the dean's list for 4 years now consecutively, and my GPA is a 4.33. I have attained that alongside managing a business and managing thousands of clients a year. And I would essentially I would have loved to do, a whole presentation on like Feynman's technique and memorization and using like keywords and that kind of thing. But the older I get, the more I realize those aren't the important points. Academic excellence is more about your character and your posture as a person, as an individual, more than it will ever be about any one study technique. Okay, so when I mentor students, one thing I notice a lot is they come to me with very little discipline, very little commitment. In that regard, like I can teach you all the study techniques and the study methods, but at the end of the day, if you aren't disciplined enough to apply them, nothing will change. So usually that's the first thing I start with. In order to get to a point where your GPA is improving and your grades, you're actually seeing an improvement in your grades, it will also depend on how much you're willing to give up. Sacrifice is like a key, I think a core trait my mom kind of imbibed in me when I was growing up. Good things take time. Good things also don't come without sacrifice. What does this mean in the context of a student? You have an exam on Monday. It will potentially mean that on Saturday, you need to miss out on Netflix. You need to miss out on going out with your friends. You need to miss out on texting, spending the day in bed and texting the whole day, just so you can study. And that's something I've found is a fading trait, especially from younger people, even though I'm a young person, but delayed gratification will help you a lot in life, not just in your academics. Overall, it takes a very wise and disciplined person to see something presented to them and say, I won't do this now. I will push this to a later time so I can really focus on what's important. That already will take you a long way in terms of your grades. And so that's one thing I have over time I've specialized in. Discipline is like a muscle. You train it. And I've reached a point where honestly, over the years, I feel like I've really, really, really trained that muscle because I've been doing things that essentially me saying no to myself just so I can say yes to a better grade or a better result. So let me start there. That's going to be important in your search for good grades. Good grades and certain things can go hand in hand. You need to sort of pick one thing to prioritize at a time and do the other thing. Yes, you can definitely still, feel free, go out, be fun, but in your 24 hours, if there's a studying time, make sure nothing is coming between you and that studying time. That's very important. So I always start from delayed gratification, saying no to yourself, and just being able to sacrifice for the results you want. It's very, very important. So my grades have seen an upward trajectory since I entered undergrad. In my first year, my GPA was about a 3.8. And then over time, it's now at a 4.33. So over the years, it took a series of certain decisions. Besides delayed gratification, which I like to start with, let me now get to specific mechanisms and methods you can actually put in place when you're thinking of increasing your grades. The first one is being an active participant. And another thing I've noticed is a lot of people are passive observers in their own lives. Don't do that. Actually take an active stand in your own life. Advocate for your own self. If you're a student in university, when you go to class, don't try to hide. This is one of the things I always recommend to my mentees. My goal for the first few classes, every time a new semester begins, is to be known. That's my goal for the first few classes. I don't even attend the first class just so I can actually know what the course is about. My main goal is first to be known. And you might be wondering, why is this important? Teachers are human beings. The more they know you, the more likely they are to remember who you are. You aren't necessarily doing this so they give you favors, but when your name keeps popping up in someone's head, they can't help but help you and notice who you are. So for instance, when the semester opens and I go to my first class, my main goal there is to be known. So either I will answer a question, therefore letting other students in the class know I have arrived, or I will respond to something the teacher asked, so the teacher himself or herself can know, okay, this is someone who is obviously knowledgeable a bit about what we are studying. It doesn't matter even if you get the question you've answered wrong. The most important thing is by the end of that class, the teacher will know who you are. They will have you in mind. A third thing I do after every lecture, every new semester, is I go up to the front when people are leaving the class and say, oh, hi, my name is Shamima. I'm happy to be in this course with you. Introducing yourself goes a long way in terms of relationship building with your professors. And you want that relationship. It comes in handy. Sometimes the professor might offer you a teaching assistant position, which will mean you become closer to them. You get to understand more of what they need. But secondly, it also gives you access to them. Who better to be friends with than the person who is in charge of determining your GPA? And so my first class, I don't even focus on making friends in the class. I focus on getting the professor to like me. Again, a game changer in my grades, because what ends up happening is because I've built that rapport with the professor. Sometimes, let's say I know I'm going to need an extension on an assignment. When I email them, they are more empathetic to listening to me, because over the semester, I've had a track record of showing them I am an excellent student. And no matter how you slice it, teachers will always like students who come across as being good and trying, putting in an effort. So that's one of the first things. It has insane benefits. Even if you don't benefit from this relationship that semester in terms of your grades, you've earned a recommender for graduate school. If you are interested in furthering your studies, that professor you've built this relationship with will be happy, more than happy to recommend you when it's time for graduate school. So that's one of the things I do. I always try to build relationships, and I try to maintain them. So I would email a professor, check in on them out of the blue. Again, standing out will serve you well in life, which is why I began with, don't try to be passive. Wherever I find myself, because my name is already rare, I've never been in a class where there were two Shamimas. I leverage on that and I try to stand out as much as possible. So even there are days where I won't go to lectures. When I go to an office hour the following week, the teacher will be like, oh, you weren't in class last week. And I'm like, oh yeah, I couldn't make it. Again, you want to be known and recognized by the people who are in charge of your grades. So that's one of the first things. The second thing I would say in terms of academic excellence and academic success is building out some time of your schedule and putting that towards your academics. Back home, we used to call it timetable. You are never too old to have a timetable, right? You don't grow out of having a timetable. It's very, very essential. And you don't even need to set a timetable in the sense that, we used to do it from maybe 1 to 2, you are studying social studies, 4 to 5, I'll be doing science. No, I found a better method of actually demarcating time to studying. So what you can do is, for instance, this semester, I'm taking 5 courses. I don't necessarily have a timetable where it's like, okay, every Monday from 2 to 3, I'll be doing this. I don't recommend that method. And that's just because different things happen. On a particular Monday, you might be heartbroken, so you are crying, so you can't make it for the 2 to 3. On another Monday, your parents, might need you to travel. You never know. So one thing I do, instead of making it a time thing, what I do is I make time commitments. So I don't have specific hours in my day where I study, but I have specific hours I want to study for. So using the same social studies, social science example, say Monday, I say I want to study mathematics and social studies. I won't say 1 to 2, I'll be studying mathematics. I'll just say on Mondays, I want to study math for a minimum of 3 hours. That's just what I will say. And I will say, I want to study social studies for a minimum of 2 hours. Using this time commitment method instead of a rigid 1 to 2, 3 to 4, it gives you flexibility because it's just the goal. No matter what time you study, the most important thing is that on Mondays, you study for 5 hours, 3 hours dedicated to math, 2 hours dedicated to social studies. Building out a schedule like this allows you room because your schedule can expand or detract based on whatever you are doing on a particular Monday, because it's not fixed to maybe 4 to 7 or 4 to 6. All you are doing is essentially saying on Mondays, you want to make sure you studied math for 3 hours. So that can be from 12 to 3. It can be from 3 to 6. It can be from 7 to 10. As long as you've studied math for 3 hours on Monday, you've achieved your goal. That is something that was a game changer for me. Using time commitments as opposed to rigid times. Because one thing you do when you use a rigid time, like Monday, I'm supposed to be studying math from 12 to 3, and you aren't able to do it, it dampens your morale. You feel like you're disappointing yourself. And then you don't actually feel as motivated or inspired to do the next thing. That's how goals work. the more goals you set, the more you achieve them, the more you feel like, yes, I'm doing something. So that's why I'm trying to move you from having a rigid schedule, like 6 to 9, I must be home. You won't always be home 6 to 9. An emergency can come up. But if you give yourself that you just need to study for math for 3 hours on Mondays, if an emergency comes up between 6 to 9, no worries. You can come home, bath, study math from maybe 11 to 2 a.m. and sleep. You've still done the math for 3 hours. So that's a second thing I wanted to mention. So I've discussed delayed gratification. I've discussed going out of your way to be known in class is very important. The third thing I have discussed is moving away from fixed schedules to schedules that are flexible, just based on hourly commitments. So that's the third thing. A fourth thing I want to share in terms of academic excellence will potentially be setting specific goals for yourself. So I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with the acronym SMART, like set goals that are specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. I don't know if everyone is familiar with that, but over the course of a semester, try to set very realistic goals for yourself. Achieving one goal is what propels you to achieve the next one, right? So if you realize you've set too many unrealistic goals for yourself, it's a bit difficult to achieve them because you do the first one, you fail, and then that sorrow, that mood affects the next goal you've set. Always set very realistic goals that are increasing in small amounts. It kind of makes you feel better. So even in this example I gave about your schedule, it would help if you begin with maybe a course you're very comfortable with and then progress into a course you're less comfortable with. So if you have an issue with chemistry, but you're very comfortable with studying home economics, for instance, begin with home economics, build that morale, and then move into a course you find more difficult. Always try to go from what you're comfortable with to what you are uncomfortable with to kind of build resilience and build confidence coming from something you think is easier. That's an important point in academic excellence as well. And I found that memorization isn't as effective. I know when we are in Ghana, because when I was in secondary school, at least, the most brilliant people were the people who could memorize. But then you change your education system and then you realize when you come abroad, actually, they value people who actually seem to understand what it is being taught. So I would recommend that as well. Try to really understand, well, honestly, with caution, because I'm not sure if maybe professors still want you to quote exactly what is in the textbook. But I found that trying to actually understand what it is you're studying goes a long way to helping you. One of the main criteria I use to determine that I have understood a material or a course is when I can explain it in my own words. So try to essentially understand and be able to explain in your own words what you are studying, as opposed to being able to just quote verbatim what it is. And try to apply the things you learn to real life situations, right? Education is like a continuum. It's not you study one semester, you write an exam and it's done. Always try to, in the broader context of things, relate what it is you're studying to other things, other new things you find. Okay, so I've given a few points. Are there any questions up until now? Because I'm going to go into a few technical studying methods and tips. Are there any questions, comments?
Shamima,
Hi.
Please go ahead to continue with the presentation. I'll ask that participants put their questions in the chat box. When we are done completely with the presentation, then we address those.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you too. So when I used to actively mentor students, now 4th year, final year, so I'm busy. I haven't done that in a while. I used to teach them certain studying techniques. The first one is chunking. I'm probably going to type it in. And actually, when I'm done, I will take you through. So, Margaret, if that's okay, I have a free resource that I can share with everyone on the call.
Excellent. Please go ahead.
Yeah. So chunking is the first study method I'm going to be talking about. Chunking is essentially breaking a bigger thing into smaller units. So think of, it's very sad, but I'm going to use fufu as an example. Think of when you're eating fufu, you know how you need to sort of like take smaller portions until you realize the whole thing is done. Chunking is essentially the same way. It's breaking a bigger course load into separate units. What does this mean on a day-to-day for students? If I have a criminal justice exam, actually I have an exam coming up. I have a criminal justice exam October 2nd. Say I pick my textbook and I realize from today is September 23rd. From September 23rd to October 2nd, I realize, okay, I have about 7, 8, 9. I have about 9, 10 days to that first test. Say I pick my textbook up and I see there are 100 pages to cover before I'm really prepared for this test. Like there are 100 slides I haven't studied for this criminal justice exam. Chunking would mean on each day leading up to that exam, I study 10 slides. 10 times 10 is 100, right? But chunking is breaking the bigger portion, 100, into smaller units of 10. What you are doing there is your brain actually isn't designed to absorb everything within a sitting. That's why usually it's a waste of time the night before trying to cram 100 slides. Your brain functions better when you give it enough time to assimilate information. So chunking would essentially mean instead of studying 100 slides the night before a test, study 10 slides each day for 10 days leading up to the test. What you end up allowing your brain to do is every 10 days, your brain, every day for 10 days, your brain only needs to focus on 10 slides. You also allow yourself enough time to rest, okay? Because your mates might be studying 100 slides the night before and you might feel unserious. But what you've been doing is you've been building up the knowledge. You had a plan. That's one thing that will save you. Planning ahead of your test and your exams is very important. You can only use chunking if you have thought ahead of time. So 10 days before your exam, studying 10 slides on each day, you study 10 slides, you ask yourself questions on it, you answer them, you watch lecture videos on those 10 particular slides, you read the textbook on those 10 particular slides. Again, you are giving yourself enough time. Every day you are focusing on one main thing. Your brain isn't hazy because you are giving it enough time to process the information. So chunking is something I utilize a lot. Very, very, very important. So I can have an exam in 7 days. If I see there are 7 chapters I haven't covered, what it would mean is each day will be dedicated to a specific chapter. And I will stick to only that religiously because you need to give your brain enough time to process the information you are giving it. So chunking works like magic. And you don't only need to apply chunking to studying, you can apply it to homework as well. Say you have a big paper due first week of October. You can do one piece of the paper each day leading up to the first week. So maybe Saturday, today, you don't want to stress yourself. You pick a topic. Sunday, you go to church, so you don't do anything. Monday, you start researching the topic you've picked. Tuesday, you meet with a professor to discuss the topic. So what ends up happening is each day, you are moving the needle. Each day, you are doing something with respect to your paper. What you realize is by the time October 1st comes up, you probably even have a draft to review before you even submit. And I think that is what sets excellent students apart from the rest. Procrastination is nice. I'm not even going to lie and say I don't procrastinate. There are things that I procrastinate on. But when you're able to beat procrastination, you realize it makes your life much, much easier. One thing I'm doing this semester is for every assignment that is due in October, I want to have a draft ready by the end of September. So the night before, when people are now stressing to cite and find sources, I am reviewing my final draft and submitting. A lot of proactiveness goes into being a good student, just beyond hard work. So sacrifice goes in there, but also proactiveness goes in there. Being able to be proactive enough to know, oh, first week of August, I actually have a family meeting. Why don't I get more done in September? So in the first week of August, when these family meetings come up, I can still perform. A lot of proactiveness goes into being a good student. So that's another thing I wanted to share. So try to break down your work into smaller units. It will pay off. It will pay off over the course of the semester. Another thing that I wanted to share is basically a method that I use essentially when I'm reading. When you're, and I'm sure a lot of us, or we all have readings at university courses. So most of the time we are assigned readings. When you're first presented with a material to study, the first thing you do is try to scan it or skim it. I believe this method is called SQ3R. I believe. So there's a method called SQ3R. I'm going to type that as well. Beyond chunking. Again, because I mentor people on these things, that's the only reason why I know study methods and their technical names. But there's a method of studying called SQ3R. I believe there's one called SQ4R as well. So, but they're essentially the same thing. So essentially, the S stands for skimming or scanning. When you're first presented with a text, try to scan or skim it, get to know what things in that text you already know. That's usually my first approach to the criminal justice readings I have to do. I first see, so every semester, I will first look at my syllabus and be like, okay, there are some things that are familiar to me here. Remember, initially, I mentioned go from the things you know to the things you don't know. This S is essentially that, right? I pick up my syllabus in my textbook. I'm like, okay, these are some things I already know from my previous courses. Remember, knowledge is a continuum. You've been studying since first year, so there are some things you now already know. I first pick those things out, and then I try to be like, okay, this is what I remember from this course. This is what I remember from this course. These are the things I remember from these topics. So that's the S. First, skim. When you're presented with a text, first skim it, identify the things you know, and also take note of the things you don't yet know. The second thing you do is question. So besides skimming, now you begin to question the text, like what could certain things mean, right? A lot of students, when they are presented with a text, they dive right into reading it and spend 3 hours reading a complex text. At the end of the day, realize they haven't done much because they don't get what they've read. Try to use this method. First, scan it to see the things you're familiar with, then begin questioning it. I love using highlights. So any physical textbook of mine, you'll see insane things highlighted. Try to have a highlight, maybe put a mark against the things you are questioning or the things you don't know yet. And then the 3 R's stand for reading. So you read it. After you've done the skimming to determine what you're familiar with and the questioning to determine what you aren't familiar with, you then read the text. Going into a text like this really makes you alert. It's why I don't know if everyone had this experience. When we were in school, and remember we would do comprehension, you would read your teachers would tell you, actually go through the questions before you start reading the documents, like the comprehensive text. Go through the questions. So while you are reading the text, you'll be answering the questions in your head. It's the same kind of method. Question the text first. So most textbooks will have questions at the back of every chapter. Look at those questions before you start reading. It will help you read with an informed perspective, because you are reading essentially to answer some of the questions at the back of that text. A game changer in reading university texts, I have found. So that's important. So once you are done reading, try to recite what it is you remember. When I pick a textbook, after I've read a particular chapter, I always try to tell myself, okay, this is what this chapter was about. These are some key terms I'm taking away from this chapter. And then the final thing you do is recall. So essentially that's what SQ3R is. Scan, question, read, recite, and then recall. The last thing you do is recalling exactly what you studied. Now, you won't remember everything you studied. That's why it's the first time you are being introduced to that text. But try to make some notes on the side on the most important things you are drawing from each chapter. Again, this helps you go to class informed, well-read. You are able to contribute to classroom discussions, which feeds into the first point I made about trying to stand out. Professors never forget good students. I am currently in my 4th year of university. My high school teacher still writes recommendation letters for me. And when he writes them, he asks for my perspective. Like, Shamima, is this enough? Do you think anything should be tweaked? Like, can I get your input? And this is a professor who has, I believe, a PhD in philosophy. A very reputable person, but he asks me for feedback on the recommendation letters he writes. In fact, in class, he used to ask me to share my perspective on the topic he was teaching. Again, it's not just about being a teacher's pet, but being in a teacher's good graces. Excellent. You get perks that your mates won't necessarily have. And again, like I said, teachers are human beings. No matter how they try not to have favorites, personally, if you find me in your class, it's hard not to have a favorite, because I keep trying. And it pays off at the end of the day, because you realize they are more empathetic to you as a student. And it's only human. We all like people who make our jobs easier. So a teacher will almost always resonate towards a good student. So very, very, very important. So I think I've walked you through a bit of discipline, values, delayed gratification, and some study methods. So chunking, XQ3R, and then chunking, essentially, like I said, breaking down huger portions of work into smaller units. Don't wait till the day of the test. Try to read a portion of your slides each day up until the test day. So it helps you, honestly, because on exam days, you realize you are less stressed. And this is coming from experience. I had a, it wasn't criminal justice. No, it was critical thinking. There was a semester where I had a critical thinking exam. Now, there was no way to know that on the day of the critical thinking exam, I would be heartbroken, essentially. I was heartbroken like the week of that exam. So I couldn't actually study. But because I had been studying the whole semester, I didn't need to study for my critical thinking exam. Like the night before, I think I cried or something. I didn't really study, but I got a 90% at the end of the day because I had been building up that reserve. I never missed a tutorial. I was always present in class. When I come back home, I would read the chapter that we've been assigned. I would do the work. And I ended up getting a 90% for a critical thinking course, even though the night before I didn't study. It makes you more confident. Good grades, it makes you more confident. So I think these are some of the tips that I would share to make enough time and room for your specific questions.